Welcome to our Indie-stry chat. The members of Bloodhound Pix and an occasional guest give their no BS experiences with current aspects of the industry. Thank you for joining me, Heather.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Craig.
Yeah, so I guess let's just start off if you want to kind of give your history and up until how you started working in comics.
Well, fun fact, Craig, I don't know if you know, you and I went to college together.
Yes.
I was actually rereading Apartment 3A the other week, so it's kind of serendipitous that you messaged, because we did that scene in Terry's class back in the day.
Yes. I remember that.
Yeah, so actually college is where I kind of really got into comics. I was studying film and theater at the time, as you know, and how I spent my few hours of free time was I reviewed comics for various entertainment sites. And it was upon graduating that I kind of realized I didn't want to do film or theater anymore. So I kind of had this like existential crisis at 21 of, oh my God, I've wasted my entire life. And it was at that moment that a friend of mine had said to me, you know, Heather, you like comics, why don't you just do that? Mm-hmm. And it had never crossed my mind that comics was a possible career trajectory for me. You know, it's not, you're from the middle of nowhere in Michigan too. Like, I'm sure, you know, like, you didn't have the writer of Batman come to your school on career day. You didn't have the publisher of Marvel stop by. That just wasn't, you know, there wasn't an option. You become a teacher, lawyer, doctor, and that's not it. Those are your pathways. And so as soon as, you know, it was like that moment in movies where, like, the light bulb goes on, right? And, you know, your brain explodes, your mind is blown. Oh, my God, this is it. And I just remember, you know, I kind of had horse blinders on, and it was not a matter of if, but a matter of when. It really just came down to researching what opportunities there were out there. At that time, you know, Twitter was just starting up, and as any good millennial does, I started tweeting other comics professionals for advice. You know, I knew I didn't want to be a writer. I enjoyed writing, but it wasn't really my passion. I love to draw, but the idea of doing interiors for a comic was super, super intimidating. But there was this role as the editor that was really intriguing. It was kind of the person behind the scenes who put all the projects together, cast them, worked with the talent. That really reminded me of a lot of what I did producing film and theater. Very, very similar. And that's how I met via Twitter Jordan White, who was an editor at Marvel at the time. I asked him if he would talk with me. We were both going to the same convention that year, C2E2 in Chicago, and just kind of explain what it is a comic editor does. And when I left that show, I knew this is it. I'm going to do it. From there, you know, you come from the indie film and theater circuit. Yeah. You produced your own shows. You put together your own theater troupes. I did the same thing with comics. Okay. I just started reaching out to people I knew, people I didn't know, friends of friends, to see who would collaborate with me. And I put together a huge anthology called Unlawful Good, an anthology of crime. We got it funded on Kickstarter. Yeah. And yeah, it had, I think, God, it was like 16 short stories, all themed of crime, with creators from all over the world. And later that same year, October, New York Comic Con, I was going to network and meet with other creators, and I was working on the final push of the Kickstarter for the anthology, and I met Jordan again, the same editor for Marvel, and I showed him, hey, look what I've done since the last time we spoke. And he took a look at it, and, you know, he said it looked good, and he said, would you be ever willing to move to New York? And I was, absolutely. 1 month later, I had an interview with Marvel. 2 months later, I packed my bags, bought a one-way ticket to New York, and kind of been here ever since.
And so you kind of came in at a time that was a major shift, I'd say, in the comic book industry, and then, you know, obviously there was the growth of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Disney owning Star Wars. So kind of what, and, you know, for the longest time, for all these decades, it was kind of, you know, there was one view of like one particular comic book audience, and now we're seeing that there was actually tons all along. And so what was that like, I guess, starting out, in, I guess, working with, one of the top comic book companies ever?
Terrifying.
Yeah.
I remember, so I got brought in, I was hired specifically to work on the Star Wars line at Marvel.
Okay.
And Star Wars has been a huge passion of mine my entire life. And so, my first day at Marvel, I'm working with, not only am I working with Mark Waid and Terry Dodson, who are legends in the industry at Marvel, but I'm working, on Princess Leia and Star Wars, and my first job is to write the opening crawl for a Star Wars comic, and I remember having so much anxiety about it. It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And who am I? I'm just this scrawny kid from Michigan. Like, I definitely had imposter syndrome for a long time because, like you said, there is this stereotypical view of what a quote unquote real comic fan is, and I didn't feel like even though I worked in a comic shop through college, even though I wrote for, fan websites and did reviews and went to Comic Cons, I still didn't feel like I qualified as a real fan. It took a little bit of working, that deep in the industry to kind of like get comfortable and be acknowledged of like, I don't know, I'm one of the guys, like I'm cool, I can do this,
Yeah.
Like it was a thing where I never felt like I was a Star Wars nerd until I went to Marvel and started talking Star Wars and people had no clue what I was talking about.
Okay. How did that, as you talked about having a degree in theater and film, did it play any part in going into comics?
It's funny. Over half the editorial staff at Marvel came from theater backgrounds.
Oh.
I think there is a lot more in common with theater and film with comics than there is traditional prose. When you're editing or writing traditional prose, it's a very insular, it's a very singular event. It's a very singular experience. It's you, the writer, and you, the editor. There might be one or two other people involved, but it's pretty much that's it. But with comics, you have an entire team that has to collaborate towards a singular vision and a singular goal. It's very akin to theater where, say you're a producer or produce your production company, you have to source ideas, find the right ideas you want to produce or publish. You then have to put the teams together to produce that project and make sure that they're all working together cohesively. You have to problem solve when that doesn't happen. You have to manage budgets, and you have to market it, and you have a deadline. The show must go on in theater, and the book's got to go to print to hit that on sale date. And if life happens in theater, your lead actor breaks his leg, like what do? You have an understudy, you have fill-ins, you have subs, and it's the same thing in comics. Oh. It's a lot of improv, as I like to say. Like, I think improv has helped me greatly, but also having a lifelong career of producing creative projects and group projects successfully made transitioning into comics a breeze. Honestly, all I had to learn was more so how comic storytelling works from a visual standpoint and how the different, cogs in the engine work together. And that's something you would learn on the job anyway.
It's kind of where I wanted to go next, so that's great. As I've read up more and been a fan myself, I've kind of learned that a lot of comics now are written more, are going away from the days of even Alan Moore, where they're written almost like a screenplay in terms of, the way the dialogue is approached. And there's the whole mentality that some people have that, if they want a movie made, they'll, let's make it as a comic because then I can have the creative control. Like, has that shifted any since you've come in terms of how the comic storytelling is told based on when? Yeah.
It all depends, it depends on the publisher, it depends on the creative team you're working with. In Hollywood and or in theater even, there is a very specific format that your scripts must be written in. If you are a screenwriter in LA and you turn your script in to your producer or a production company and it's written in a different format, they won't even look at it, right?
Yeah.
You know, they'll laugh you out of Hollywood. I was trying to think of a street name in Hollywood, and I couldn't think of any.
Why not just Hollywood Boulevard?
There you go. Whatever. I don't know. I'm a New Yorker. I avoid LA as much as I can. Oh. But in comics, you know, it's very, very different. Where really the script is just a conversation between the writer and the artist. Okay. And so there are some writers that stick to a very, you know, specific format. Some editors prefer, like, nope, this is the only format I will read. But really, for me, my personal philosophy is whatever works best for you. You know, if this is the way you write and it can communicate clearly to the artist and the artist understands and we can get great storytelling based off of that, awesome. You know, there's something that's called the Marvel method for scripts. And it's something that Stan Lee did and started, and some writers still do, where he didn't write, you know, panel 1, Spider-Man jumps off of the Empire State Building. He says, I'll save you, Gwen Stacy. Panel 2, Gwen Stacy runs across the street. Like, that's not how Stan did it. Stan would just kind of write, you know, here's sort of what happens on this page. Steve Ditko go nuts.
Okay.
And then after it was drawn, the writer would then come back in and dialogue it, do what's called a dialogue pass. And so it's a little bit more fluid, but it really goes to show, you know, artists aren't just monkeys. You know, artists aren't just, you know, they don't just learn a dance and choreograph it exactly as the writer has prescribed. Like, artists in comics are hired because we want to see their interpretation. Yeah. And a lot of times they will make changes to the script because they know how to do visual storytelling better than anyone else. Yeah. You know, I think that's something that a lot of people, you know, who just don't know or don't understand the art form don't think about. They don't understand how much an artist actually puts into, because you mentioned Alan Moore. Alan Moore is known for his insane scripts, right? Yeah. If it appears on the page, it's because Alan told the artist for it to go on the page. Every single book on that shelf that you can read its spine, that's because Alan wrote. These are the books that are on that shelf. Whereas you'll get someone like Scott Snyder, who is known for his run on Batman, most recently with Greg Capullo. And Scott will write, Batman walks into a theater, and that's it. Oh. And then Greg Capullo will do this huge, gorgeous, double-page spread, Baroque theater, fisheye lens with thousands of people and an opera on the stage. And that's all from Greg. And so I think there's something, like, really cool about that, you know, with the different pairings of these different creators. It's like alchemy, you know?
Okay. Yeah. So would you say that, because even to this day that it's really grown and more of a light is shined on it, is the comic industry pretty close-knit, or even, what is it like, I guess, getting into it? How is the community itself?
It's pretty tight-knit. I mean, you know, it's a very, very small industry. You know, there's only a handful of publishers, only 2 big publishers, right? Your big 2. And, you know, if you're a freelancer, you're working for all the companies all at once, usually. And, you know, we have all these Comic-Cons where we travel and hang out with each other and, you know, drink and catch up. And they're like mini family reunions that you get to go to every year. And hopefully we'll continue to after this crazy global pandemic. Yeah. I really miss my con experience this year. I'm real bummed about it. But yeah, no, it's just hanging out. I mean, like, that's how I got to know, you know, so many creators before I was working professionally in the industry, was going to these conventions. Comics is in a really unique experience in the world of media entertainment, where fans have such close personal accessibility to the creators. You know, like, you have the writer of Batman who's one of the greatest characters of all time, household name that everyone knows. And you can go to this convention and walk up and shake his hand. You can have a conversation with him. And then you can go to the bar with him afterwards where everyone else is. You know, you can't do that with Tom Cruise. Yeah. No. There's no Tom Cruise con. So who knows? Maybe one day there will be. And so there's something really, really special about this industry where it feels so big, because in a way it is. It's as big as its fandom. It's as big as its community and that. But the people who create it, it's really there are more professional baseball players than there are people working at Marvel and DC.
Oh, okay.
Like, I think that's the easiest way to put it. Yeah. You know, it's probably easier to break into the MLB than it is to break into comics.
Okay. So, I guess since you mentioned the pandemic, we have to talk about it. Has it kind of altered how comics are done? And is it getting to a point where, like, a no turning back type of way, where maybe, you know, as, for example, I guess the movies, they're saying, well, now movies, even new releases are going to be transferred more to digital. Where is this something that's starting to progress that way too for comics? Which I know there are digital comics or release of web comics.
Yeah, I mean, like kind of in the same thing, you know, straight to digital streaming with film. You know, I think we all expected it to happen a lot sooner just because it existed, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like digital comics, it was never really nurtured. And so it didn't really have the chance to grow, and now it's kind of forced to. You know, the industry was thrust into the deep end, if you will. And comics has been affected greatly. Comic shops are, I don't know if you know, considered non-essentials, though I would say otherwise. But so because of that, like a lot of comic shops, you know, they had to close their doors to customers and could only deal with their orders, you know, curbside or delivery, which that is, you know, though frustrating. So long as they're getting new products, they can still sell to their customers. Yeah. The bigger issue came when the federal government shut down the distributors. So, you know, if we can't send our comics to the printer because the printer has nowhere to send them and the product can't get to the stores. So if publishers want to sell products, literally the only way they can right now is digitally. And then that brings into a very complicated endeavor that I don't really, because I just work in editorial, it's more of a sales and marketing thing. They have these conversations with retailers, but basically anything that we publish digitally during this time would be undercutting the retailer. You know, that's literally taking money out of retailers' mouths, which is problematic, you know. And so it's this kind of, you know, it's a very complicated thing that we as an industry are trying to figure out right now. You know, how do we sustain, how do we survive without undercutting the freelancers or undercutting the retailers or undercutting the fans? And, you know, there is no easy answer. Yeah. We're still figuring this out. But as states are slowly starting to open back up, our distributors have a plan where, you know, books are starting to go back to print later this month. So things are going to be starting to roll out again. But it is giving the industry, you know, a good hard look. What do we do? You know, how do we combat this? How do we start to build and invest more into the digital landscape while also still keeping the retailers fed? And it's forcing people to be creative and break tradition, which honestly isn't a bad thing.
Then going back before this all took place, what would, I guess, the day in the life of an editor like? Explain that a little bit.
A lot of coffee.
Yeah.
A lot of crying, a lot of chaos. Now, I mean, there's no simple day in the life. Every single day is very, very different. Mm-hmm. I think it ultimately comes down to what are my priorities that week. Okay. You know, what books do I have going to print this week? And those are obviously the priority to get done and get out the door. But then also comics orders 3 months in advance, or announces books 3 months in advance. So it's what books are getting announced, what covers do I have to, you know, have ready. Do I check, you know, every week I want to check in on every single one of my projects, you know, and I have, as a senior editor, I'm managing, you know, 10 to 12 different projects all at the same time. And those are just the ones that are currently in production, not the new ones I'm developing. You know, staying in touch with freelancers, seeing who's available. And the thing now that I'm starting to do as I'm higher up at Valiant now is I'm starting to touch on things that aren't just comics. I'm touching on things like the YA novels. So I'm reading those manuscripts, working on like video game development and stuff, you know, brand management type things. It's a lot of juggling, and it's a lot of, because comics, you know, it's not just everyone is in New York City anymore. Yeah. It's a global thing. So there's a lot of times where I have to be on a call with Australia. So I'm going to hop on a call at like 8, 9 o'clock at night, or somehow trying to figure out how to coordinate a phone call with LA and London at the same time. And there's a very thin, small window where everyone is awake at the same time.
Yeah. You brought up your senior editor position, and you switched over to Valiant. So what are the differences from what you experienced with something like Marvel to Valiant that has these characters that, I know there's the big one right now is Bloodshot in it, you know, but it's one of the like indie company. So what was that switch like?
Yeah, so Marvel is great. You know, I owe Marvel a lot. I started my career there, and I got to do some pretty unbelievable things that I'm very, very grateful for. But one of the things when you're with a company that, you know, these characters are 80 years old, you can't, there's only so much creative freedom you have. And that's not to say that's a bad thing. You know, these characters work for a reason. You know, Spider-Man has this longevity for a reason. We all love Captain America for a reason. But you can't do massive status quo shifts, you know? Or you can pretend to, but at the end of the day, the toys have to go back in the box, right? Like, Spider-Man, we can say Spider-Man's a bad guy, but we all know he's not a bad guy and he's never going to die. We all know that, you know? Why? Because money. And that's, you know, that's just kind of what it is. And there's nothing wrong with that, but after a while, it just, you know, for me personally, it just wasn't a good fit anymore. And one of the things I love about Valiant, and is so creative fulfilling for me personally, is the fact that the universe is so new. They got started in 1990, but they did a universe reboot in 2012. And so really, our universe is not even 10 yet. There's still so many quarters to develop and unfold, and the Valiant universe has rules that Marvel and DC don't. If you die, you stay dead in Valiant. Wow. You know, the stories have impact. And there's something that, like, is very challenging about that, because if you screw it up, like, it's indelible, you know? Yeah. But it's also a fun challenge. And, you know, the other thing, too, with Valiant is I'm getting to explore different genres that I never got to when I was at Marvel. You know, Marvel keeps things pretty similar in vein to what we see in the MCU. Pretty family-friendly. You do have your dark moments, but it's that action-adventure fun, which is great. But I'm a horror junkie. Yeah. You know, I have a Google Doc of true crime documentaries that I watch and recommend to people. You know, I like the more, you know, gritty, visceral, you know, street level stuff. My first comic was a crime anthology, you know, and I never really got to explore that at Marvel, and that's something I'm really getting to explore now, and it's so fulfilling and super fun, and yeah, I'm having a great time.
I guess this is kind of one of those little side comments. Being that you're a horror junkie, so in this, you know, podcast, part of it, we do a lot of focus on that genre. So what is it like for, I guess, horror comics? As I mean, I'm a big fan of them, and as within this podcast, a lot of people, one of the running jokes is my obsession with things like Junji Ito, and, you know, obviously,
so good.
Yeah. But so what? Is there differences you find in a genre like that? Is there a different process, I guess, for horror comics over superheroes or over even crime, for example?
You know, yes. I don't know how, like, concrete I can make them. But, like, obviously a superhero comic is going to be different than a romance comic, just like a superhero movie is going to be different than a Notebook, you know? Yeah. And so, but you can also have a romance superhero movie. Like you can do that. Genre's weird. And the thing I love so much about horror and comics is the control of pacing, with the page turns that you can do, which is really, really cool. And a lot of kind of like, how in horror films you have everything is bright and happy at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. Because no one knows the monster is out there. And it really makes you feel safe and comfortable, and then all of a sudden someone's head gets ripped off. Yeah. And you're taken unawares. And you can do that same thing with art and comics. If you have a very clean, open-lined artist that reels you into this sense of security, and then you turn a page and then it's all blood and guts and viscera, and it's just horrifying, but you can't look away. And I think that's one thing too that I like about comics is it's a static image, that you can get lost in. It doesn't happen as quickly as films do, and you sit with it, and images linger with you a lot more. But yeah, no, it's, I don't know, like I approach horror the same way I approach any other story. It's all about the mood. Yeah. How do you want someone to feel? What do you want someone to take away from this? What's the experience you're trying to produce? And those are the questions that I ask for any genre, for any story. It's what's the goal, and what do we want the reader to take away from this?
Makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I know even for myself, and I mentioned Junjito, and the one I'm reading right now, for some reason I got into Japanese manga over this quarantine. I'm reading I Am a Hero, and a lot of, there's always been that argument I've had with people of trying to explain it, that you actually can, oddly enough, have a jump scare within a comic book that's very effective.
100%.
And I think a lot of people don't, because they think it's just an image, that it's really not possible. But there's, even, again, back to Ito or back to a ton of other comics, there's stuff in there that is almost more gut-wrenching or terrifying than I've seen in a lot of film. Yeah.
Well, because I think it's because it's static, you take in so much more, and your brain isn't distracted by movement and colors and light. Yeah. Because in film, your brain has to process everything that's happening. All the sound, all the lights, and all the movement. It's trying to follow this thing. And with a comic, you can't look away. It's just there. And so I think there's something that's a lot more powerful with that. And again, it's with the jump scare, it's the page turn, right? Yeah. It's no different than opening an envelope and not knowing what the card is going to say, or opening a door and you expect it to be your boyfriend and it's the headless horseman.
Yeah. Are there any that currently you would recommend to people, or what are the ones that you kind of really champion?
So it's not a horror series, but this issue, it's issue 6 of Sandman by Neil Gaiman. It's the 24-hour diner issue. Yeah. I think it's one of the most, that issue alone, I have thought about more than any other comic I've ever read. Oh. It is just one from just like a storytelling perspective. It's brilliant. Yeah. But also from just a horror standpoint, it is chilling. I'm also a huge fan of Cullen Bunn and Tyler Crook's series. It's all wrapped up now, so you can read the whole thing, but from Dark Horse, called Harrow County. Okay. And it's good old Louisiana swamp horror. And then from Vertigo, one of their last series before they shut down, may they rest in peace, called The Clean Room by Gail Simone and John Davis Hunt, is one of the best modern horror comics I could possibly recommend.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely, because that's been on my list for some time now, on my cart or whatever.
The Clean Room?
Yeah. Because I see it pop up everywhere on like all the sites that I go to, but then I haven't been able to check it out yet.
It's so good. I ended up buying the original art to the cover. Oh wow! It's hanging here. No, it is so good, and I'm a little biased too, because John Davis Hunt, who is the interior artist on The Clean Room, absolutely blew me away with his work, and it's that series that actually got him hired onto the new Shadow Man book that I'm working on at Valiant right now with Cullen Bunn, that is a horror book as well. So obviously I recommend that. It comes out later this year.
Yeah, is there, do you want to talk, because I know you as we established, you're a senior editor there, doing a lot of work, but what are the upcoming projects there? And even for yourself, I know you also do consultation for anybody that's interested in writing for comics. And what are projects on your slate that you're really excited about?
Yeah, so as I just mentioned, the new Shadow Man series by Colin Dunn and John Davis Hunt will be out this fall from Valiant. I also have a new series that I co-developed with Ray Fox and Jeremy Hahn at Valiant called The Final Witness. It is a superhero serial killer comic. It's our first foray into true crime. I like to say it's Superman meets the Zodiac.
Oh.
So I'm a huge David Fincher fan. Zodiac's one of my favorite films. And, we really tried to bring that feeling of dread and terror into the comics. And I'm very, very excited for that one. And then, like you mentioned, I do a lot of, freelance consultation work with other creators, film, comics, video games. I talk about it all the time on my Twitter. Yep. So I highly recommend to check that out, or just to see cute photos of my puppy. Yeah.
Okay. And where can people find you and on Twitter, any social media, or even your website?
I'm very easy. It's just my name, Heather Antos.
It's been really great chatting with you, Heather, and catching up. And you gave a ton of wonderful information. And, I think I really wanted to show people that there's so many different routes you can take and be passionate about, and still utilize your creativity. And I think you're a key example of that.
Oh, thanks, Craig, and thanks for having me. This has been super fun.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hey, this is Kyle, just dropping in to let you know to please subscribe, follow, tweet, TikTok, Snapchat, do the social media things. We're starting a new little segment here called Word on the Streets, and we've got some nice testimonials from some of our fans. This week's caller is Count Orlok from the Black Forest in Germany.
I've wanted known that Bloodhound Pix found a friend in Germany.
Bloodhound Pix podcast is produced by Josh Lee, Craig Dram, and Kyle Hintz. Music by Raymond Seed. Audio editing by Kyle Hintz.